To our very eminent guest, who I should not be speaking about too much, but since you all know about Dr. Vandana Shiva, it would be erring on my part not to just say a few words. From her formative years with the Chipko movement to 1987 onwards, when she has been saving seeds in the commons to resist seed patterns and seed monopoly. She has created over 100 community seed banks and fought many cases of biopiracy, including those on Neem, Basmati and Wheat. Her work and Navdanya, the movement she started, shows that conserving and regenerating biodiversity is the answer to hunger, suspicious extinction, and climate change. Seeds of Freedom, today's talk, holds the liberation of all life on earth. Vandana Shiva is a modern-day revolutionary, and 40 years on has been fighting a heroic battle on behalf of humanity and ecologically besieged natural systems that support us. She is opposed by powerful multinational corporations invested in continuing their degenerative but lucrative agricultural practices. She is also the founder of Navdanya for the protection of founder of Navdanya, an earth-centric, woman-centric, and farmer-led movement for the protection of biological and cultural diversity. The winner of the Right Livelihood Award, the alternate Nobel. Please join me in welcoming her to deliver the lecture, Seeds of Freedom. And can I please ask you to switch off your cell phones? There will be time for photographs later.
Dear young friends from all the schools who have come here, dear Justice Prabhashi Devi, for whom I have such deep respect, and all of you who've come to celebrate Seeds of Freedom and to continue the process of defending the Seeds of Freedom. Because in fact, when we started to save seeds, the issues were much simpler, much narrower. I had no reason to be involved in agricultural seed saving. I've done my doctorate on hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory. This wasn't my chosen path. But 84 is what compelled me to look at agriculture. It was the year Punjab erupted in violence. I'd done my MSc honours in particle physics in Punjab. And it was a very peaceful state, very prosperous state in the 70s when I studied there. By 84, there was violence everywhere. 15,000 people had been killed. And some of those scenes, the filmmakers have been able to capture from the old archives so that your generation will remember. Now, Punjab is where the Green Revolution was first introduced. And for those who wonder where the word Green Revolution came from, it didn't come from the green of today. Today green means ecological. Those days, there was no green movement. Green parties hadn't been created. There was just a very strong red revolution taking place among peasants in China. And the Americans were very, very worried that this would spread to India. So they said, we're going to create a green revolution and get the farmers dependent on chemicals and seeds, so they'll be on a treadmill. And being on a treadmill, they will never think of organizing. Exactly what happened. In just a decade of the Green Revolution, the soils of Punjab were ruined, the waters of Punjab had disappeared, There's a train that leaves Punjab called the cancer train because of the heavy use of pesticide. And of course, the farmers were in deep debt, which is what the movement of 84 was. Of course, as the dominant media is so sophisticated in giving spin, they gave the spin of religious conflict on what happened in Punjab. There was no religious conflict. Religions weren't fighting each other. Everyone who had been killed was a manager of the Bhakra Dam, the head of the seed agency, engineers working on the Satluj-Yamuna Canal. And these were seen as oppressions by the farmer. And as one declaration of that time that I've cited in my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, they said, when you cannot decide how you will grow food, when you cannot decide when the water of your own rivers will reach your field, when you cannot decide what crop you will grow, you can't decide where you'll sell it or what price you'll sell it. This is a system of slavery. That's how they saw industrial agriculture, a system of slavery. And that's what they've been rebelling against since the 80s. Even now, all the protests are related to this. And as they said repeatedly for the 3 laws, interestingly, the 3 laws were brought during COVID as ordinances. But these 3 laws they were drafted by the World Bank in the Structural Adjustment of 1991. The World Bank wanted us to get rid of the Essential Commodities Act, which was created after we became independent because we didn't want the famines again. We didn't want limitless stock holding. So limits were put how much one trader could deal with. We had created these agriculture produce marketing cooperatives, which included farmers and small traders. They wanted to get rid of the APMCs. And of course, they wanted corporations to enter, so they wanted contract farming and therefore a contract law. All 3 the farmers were rebelling against. They said, we don't want to be serfs. We want to be free peasants. India is a land of a free peasantry. Every movement of ours has been of the peasants against the empire. 1987 began in Meerut. They used to kill hundreds of thousands of people if they talked about rebelling against the East India Company. Those days it was the East India Company. They'd just be hung on trees. I've been in villages where they say 200 people were hung on this tree. On another village, 500 were hung on this tree. So the people found a way to spread the movement. They'd give bread. If I gave you bread and you accepted it, you're basically saying I'm part of the movement. Because what was being stolen was bread. The British had changed the land laws. We never had private property in land. And this would be something fascinating to study. We had land as a commons. And the community knew which family has been using the land. We had use rights, not property rights. And then the East India Company introduced property land. They said the last bit of soil of India is the property of England. And that's why they collected the lagam, the taxes. Our farmers starved. We had famines. Britain made $45 trillion in just the 200 years. So I understood 3 things while studying the Green Revolution. First, that the so-called higher yields did not really measure the output. Output is what a farm gives you. Yield is a commodity that leaves the farm. It's a measurement of a commodity. And Punjab used to grow 250 species of crops. And now they were growing rice in one season and wheat in one season. The wheat had come from Mexico, and the rice had come from IRRI, International Rice Research Institute. They were bred for chemical use. Because for those who are farmers here, you will know that our native varieties are always tall varieties. Because we don't grow food only for humans. We grow food for the animals. The straw goes to the soil, it grows to the animals. We grow nourishing food in diversity. We evolved 200,000 varieties of rice in the Vavilov Center of rice, which is today's Chhattisgarh and Orissa. That's where the tribal peasants evolved these rices. So I said, this measure is wrong. And I started to calculate biodiversity productivity, that what really is produced is the biodiversity. And then we started to turn it into nutrition. You know, if we were growing native seeds organically in this country, we would be growing enough nutrition, not a commodity, enough nutrition for 2 times India's population. There'd be no child who is malnourished. There'd be no one who's hungry. Because what's being grown is nutritionally empty seed, made more nutritionally empty because of the chemical production. The data now is clear, 70% nutrition is gone with chemical production. And when you do organic, it comes right back, because the soil that gives you nutrition. And now new studies, we've just done one on the rice varieties. Every variety has a different trace element that's very, very abundant. So if you have 20 varieties, you get all your balance. The modern varieties have no nutrition, but now because they're adding iron, so iron is coming out high because they've added iron in all the new varieties. But these are just 2 studies. Calicut University studied 13 traditional varieties and found, and compared them to 2 Green Revolution varieties. They found 11% higher protein in the native varieties. And for wheat, it was 11.3% higher in the native varieties. So when we talk yield, it's a meaningless term. It doesn't tell you the state of the soil, how rich is the soil after your farming. It doesn't tell you the state of the farmer. Is the farmer prosperous or is the farmer in debt? It doesn't tell you the state of biodiversity, and it doesn't tell you the health of the food. It doesn't tell you anything about an agriculture and food system. So that's how I ended up understanding that what was being called high-yielding varieties wasn't true. And because I wrote that book, I suddenly started to get called to conferences. And one was a meeting in Geneva. I think it's referred to in the film, 1987. It was on the new biotechnologies. And the meeting was to understand what the implications are. There was no GMO at that time, just remember. 87, there was no GMO. 92 is the first commercialization of GMOs. At that time, the chemical industry was turning towards the techniques of recombinant DNA, which had been evolved in public labs, and the public scientists had put a moratorium on their own work. Very famous Asilomar Declaration, where the scientists who'd done the recombinant work, they said, we know how to do it. We don't know what it means. Either its ethical or ecological implications. Until we have a deeper understanding of the implications of what we are doing, we're putting a moratorium. But of course, the industry picked up the tools, and now at this meeting, they said, if we use genetic engineering, we can take patents on seed. That's the meeting that triggered me to start saving seed. And that's the time I said, oh, for them, you know, as Justice knows, a patent is granted for an invention that's novel, something new. A patent is not granted for anything that exists. So a patent on life, on seed, in effect, is saying we are the creators, we are the inventors, we've invented the seed. And so GMO, people get vacant, when I explain a GMO is using agrobacterium, antibiotic resistance markers, viral promoters, it's very complicated. And then when people don't understand, I say, okay, just remember, GMO means God move over. We are now the creators and we will collect the royalties and the rents. And so that's the day I started to say, now we're going to save our seeds. I didn't know how to do it. I taught myself. And for the young people, remember, if you care enough about something, you will learn how to do that. Anything. Learning comes from love. Learning comes from care. But at this meeting, they said two other things. They said by the turn of the century, we'll only be 4 companies controlling all seeds and food and health. Sure enough, it's Monsanto Bayer, it's Syngenta ChemChina, it's Corteva, which is the merger of Dow and DuPont, and Dow bought Union Carbide, which was the second reason in 1984 that I started to look at agriculture, because that was the year, 2nd December 1984, where the Union Carbide pesticide plant leaked and killed thousands of people in Bhopal. Now, there was a very, very brilliant ruling given by Justice Prabha, because Monsanto had applied for a climate-resilient patent. And given the thorough judge she is, she worked through and she said, well, you're not inventing anything new, and all the techniques you're using are all published here, here. So your patent, I think it had come to you as a challenge, no? And so she rejected the patent. Now, but exactly at that time, in the Supreme Court of the United States, there was a very famous case. A farmer had been buying soybean seeds from elevators, which is where they stock the grain, and planting it. Soybean is not hybridized, so you can literally use the grain and plant it. Monsanto sued him. They said he's buying soybean and growing it. District Court, State Supreme Court, went all the way to the Federal Supreme Court. I'm not remembering the name of the farmer. It'll come to me later. It's a very famous case of this farmer versus Monsanto. At a time, we were rejecting the climate resilient patent. The Supreme Court of the US was giving a ruling that the seed is a self-replicating machine invented by Monsanto. And even in the field, and even 20 years of its harvest, is the property of Monsanto as a self-replicating machine. Now, my mind is going back to the fact that the industry also said we're going to make an international law so no farmer can ever save seeds. And that's what pressurized me to save seeds. I said saving seeds is our duty. And the law that they were shaping was the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement of WTO. And the reason it has trade-related, because our ambassador, Ambassador Shukla, said, but patents have nothing to do with trade. Yeah? These are national sovereign laws, and you cannot bring them into a trade treaty. So the lawyers of Washington just went back and put TR before IP. They said now it's trade-related by definition, and they brought it into the trade treaty. And that's the time we worked very hard. I worked with Ambassador Shukla, and we managed to get some exceptions. They wanted no flexibility. But other things happen in our country. Yeah? I used to meet the ministers. There used to be an agriculture minister called Chatranan Mishra. I used to go and tell him. I said, they want monopolies on seed through UPOV, the Plant Variety Act. And don't accept it because we have not signed to it. And we have put a sui generis option in the WTO, that we will write sui generis laws. So he said to Shuklaji and me, well, sit with our officials and draft a plant variety and farmers' rights act. So we are the only country with farmers' rights in law, because most of the breeding has been done by farmers. And Article 39 of that says the farmer's right to save, exchange, improve, sell seed can never be taken away. Pepsi tried to sue Gujarat farmers 4 crore for saving potato seed. And when I read this in the newspaper, I checked who's fighting the case. I sent our book. We have a whole book on all of this work. I sent it to him, to the lawyer, and I said, share this with the judges. And Pepsi was forced to withdraw its case because the farmers have a right. Yeah? The second is the patent amendment. We have a law that says plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions. Therefore, they cannot be patented. Article 3J. This is the law that Monsanto has been trying to challenge in High Court, in Supreme Court. And the news, and they never managed to strike down this article. But the news items will always say Monsanto won. Well, for Monsanto to win, they'd have to knock down the law. But they never managed that. It just went back to trial. And of course, the Indian companies whom they had misled that they had patents with BT cotton, they had American patents. But in India, we don't allow patents on seed. Their application, I think 27 clauses were struck down because they were related to living systems and living processes. But in the early days, when they used to talk of GMOs, they said, oh, it's such a miracle technology. We'll be able to grow food on the moon. We'll be able to grow food in the Sahara. We'll be able to grow food on toxic dumps because we'll have managed every trait. What do we have now? We have 2 toxic traits. BT cotton, which came to India illegally, 1998. I sued them. They couldn't commercialize till 2002. And now they're stacking it with the second trait, which is the Roundup resistance. So now they're trying to sell Roundup resistance BT cotton. Illegal, but it's not being stopped, even though the government has every power to stop it. Now, for those who don't know what Roundup is, literally it kills everything green. That's its work, to kill plants. And that's why genetic engineering is meant to put a resistance trait so that the plant engineered with resistance survives. Everything else dies. While I was coming from my hotel, I saw all these women selling the suppos, the wild vegetables they collect in the fields. All of them will go. All of them will go. Medicinal plants will go. Fodder will go. And in America, the Roundup resistance has created so much. But, they forget there's evolution. They forget that plants will evolve. And the weeds they want to kill can become super resistant to Roundup. Half the farms of America are overtaken with super weeds that can't be controlled. The amaranth that we use as a wild green is now growing so tall that no spray will kill it. They're having to hire labor to pull it out. So BT cotton failed to control pests. Roundup ready crops failed to control weeds. But they don't stop, because the issue is owning life and collecting royalties. And because they didn't get through with the GMOs, and I was asked by the UN to come and frame a treaty for biosafety, because in '92 I was the only one talking GMOs and biosafety. And the UN said, well, help us write a law, and this is called the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So we got strong regulation. So now they want to deregulate. And the new GMO techniques they are evolving are actually the old GMO techniques. They still have to use the agrobacterium to introduce the genes. But they now use the metaphor of gene editing like it's a computer program where all you have to do is cut and paste. Life is not a word program. Life is complex self-organization with every part of the genome related to every other part. Every organism related to every other organism. So research has already shown that editing one gene can lead to 1,500 unpredictable impacts on other genes. Now you don't want a system where the genome has been scrambled because you don't know what that means. The best was a California university attempt to make hornless cattle. We celebrate Appongal and Matupongal with the horns of the cattle. The horns are the link to the cosmos. In fact, the biodynamic system uses the horns of animals to create the homeopathic solutions. So they wanted to get rid of the horns. Partly because when you put the animals in prisons, then they harm each other with the horns. Just like when you put all the pigs together, then they get at each other's tails, so they have to get rid of the tail and the teeth. And the chicken, the reason they have beaks is that's how they eat. But when they're in a factory farm, they use their beaks to hurt each other. So the minute a chicken is born, the first thing they do is take the beak and burn it at 400 degrees centigrade. And they also then look at, if it's an egg farm, so you need female chicks, then you literally throw all the male chicks and cyanide them to death. And this to me is the difference between India and the industrial West. India has constantly seen diversity everywhere. Every plant is diverse. Every animal has, we breed dual purpose animals, both for energy as well as milk. The idea that everything has to be one-dimensional is what I call the monoculture of the mind. And of course, this is now reaching ultimate levels, and I'll come to that. So this new gene editing has two purposes. They say it's natural. Therefore, you don't have to look for safety. Treat it as nature. Don't look. Don't see, don't find. But the interesting thing is, when it comes to a patent claim, they still want to claim novelty. For the same thing, they say it's natural when we have to run away from responsibility, but it's novel when we have to take a patent. And the same 4 companies which took patents on GMOs and monopolized the seed sector, already just in a few years of this non-gene editing, Corteva, the Dow-DuPont merger, has 100 international patents on gene-edited crops. Privileged some powerful European men with a mind. As Descartes said, I'm a thinking thing without a body. Poor man. He wouldn't be alive if he had no body. Thinking thing without a body. And of course, there are people in Silicon Valley who want this thinking thing to become transhumans. That's the religion of Silicon Valley these days. following Descartes. Descartes is their guru. And they literally are saying, we have to get rid of evolution, we've got to get rid of biology, and we've got to merge with the machine. That means we have to end our humanity. Because we are human, because we are beings of the earth. And the escape from our earthiness and our biology has been the escape that has always been sought for, including, in my view, the escape from the earth in terms of wanting to go to a dead planet with SpaceX. You just take care of the earth. So much to do. Yeah? And the interesting thing is, of course, governments are willing to put money into that and put a subsidy on SpaceX. But the same issues that are causing disease, 75% of the chronic diseases are now linked to junk food. And for me, it's such a delight, and I want to thank Ranvi. When I arrived last night, he treated me to a nice dosa and nice filter coffee. And that's how my day began. That's what I had for breakfast. I'm not going to have anything else in South India. And that this good food is available to the last person. You know? And if you remember COVID, I wrote a piece on the ecology of the virus. Because two things were becoming, at that time it wasn't, the issue of the lab, it hadn't become so big, it was just the beginning. But we knew new diseases are coming, in the Western Ghats, there's a Kiasnu disease. Because they're chopping the forest so much, the monkeys are coming close to the settlement. And the fleas of the monkeys are now attacking humans. And they're having a hemorrhagic fever. It's a very fatal disease called the monkey disease also. And that's across the world, 300 new infectious diseases that didn't exist before. But if you then look at the data, who was dying? Of course, the old people, but people who were dying had diabetes or cancer. The risks were 9.2% higher for diabetes and 7.6% higher for cancer. Where do those diseases come from? Metabolic diseases that are linked to a bad food system that has violated the metabolism. But the same system is also disrupting the Earth's metabolisms because, in my view, the Earth is living. She's Gaia. And as a living organism, she regulates herself. Just like our bodies regulate themselves, we come back to the normal temperature. The body is maintaining its homeostasis, and the Earth was maintaining its homeostasis. Over 4 billion years, as a self-organized organism, bringing life on Earth, microbes and plants that fix carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, the Earth brought her temperature down from 270 degrees to 13 degrees. That's how we as humans could enter the scene. The carbon dioxide used to be 98%. She brought it down to 0.03%. Now it's about 0.04%. But compared to 98%, it's still, just think of the power of the Earth. And as we shifted industrial agriculture to what I call a fossil fuel agriculture, whether it is fossil fuel used for mechanization or fossil fuels used for chemicalization, every chemical in agriculture is based on fossil fuels. Every chemical in agriculture has its original in Hitler's Germany, in IG Farben, Standard Oil Partnership. Fertilizers used to be the same factories that made explosives and make fertilizers. The same process, Haber-Bosch makes fertilizers. 1 kilogram of fertilizer needs 2 liters of diesel. But then it emits a gas, nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. But because the industry has to sell fertilizer, they never talk of fertilizers as a problem. They never talk nitrous oxide. Earlier it was just carbon dioxide, and the most recent is they've started to talk about methane. Now this too is a strange science, because Mr. Gates, I've written 2 books on him, but his book on climate change, we have 1 stomach. Cows have 4 stomachs. That's why they emit methane. No, Mr. Gates. Cows were not emitting the stink of factory farms. In the West, if you go past a factory farm, there's a horrible stink. They call them the CAFOs, concentrated animal farm operations. And they're not letting the cows eat what they should. Cows are herbivores. They want grass. You're feeding them GMO soya from the Amazon. And that's the reason. You eat too much dal, what happens to you? So the poor cows are having to fart all the time. And our cow's cow dung is solid, and the women on the streets can pick it up and take it. In the north, they'll even make the cow pad. But in the West, it's liquid diarrhea all the time, which is now thrown into the waterways. So I wrote a book, Soil Not Oil, in the lead up of the Copenhagen summit. I said, agriculture is not being talked about. Now I'll talk about. But there were no data. But I drew it indirectly from transport. I said lots of food is moving around as food miles. Lots of processing is happening. That takes energy. And with a rough estimate at that time, I came up with about 45% of emissions come from the industrial globalized food system. The data is now more refined. 14% comes from the production systems, mechanization, and the chemicals. 20% comes from crops that are being grown in the rainforest, like Amazon and the palm oil in Indonesia. 20% of the emissions are deforestation linked to agriculture. And 20% is the food miles, the processing, the packaging. When I was growing up, there was no package waste at all. They shifted from bottled milk to plastic. And I remember my father used to wash every plastic pouch for storing something or the other. But now it's just mountains of waste everywhere. And then because the uniformity is the measure, it allows waste, 4%. Now if you just take those figures, if you shift it to organic and small farming, and 80% of the food today in the world comes from small farms. That's eaten. See, there's one system that's a commodity that gets onto container ships. The other is the food that's eaten locally. 80% of the food people eat comes from small farms. So if we shift to small farms, or protect, in India we protect our small farms, and shift to organic, and we were forced to eat soya oil and palm oil. I lived through 98 when this whole banning of native oils and banning of cold press oil mills was done. But you just get rid of that, you've shed 20%. And then if you stop getting food from far away, no ultra processing. When they wrote the new food safety law, they got rid of our Prevention of Food Adulteration Act and 7 other acts. But in effect, they made artisanal food illegal. Every street had a woman making a murku, making a papad, all made illegal. Because if you could not get an FSSAI certificate and you could not measure what you put in everything, which woman measures? She knows through history and experience. So all our local foods disappeared. All our local food disappeared. And now every remotest village, people are eating chips and people are cooking Maggi noodles. We just get rid of that and our health improves. We get rid of another 20%. We get rid of waste and garbage. And we do a Bhumi festival every year. And it'll be on 1st. And if any of you are in Delhi, please do come. It's always at the India International Center. So this year our theme for Bhumi is climate change and the future of food. And we are doing a meal to bring all this to zero, which is totally, not only is it possible we get better food. So many of our things, we didn't just use one part of the plant, So we're going to be making the ridge gourd as a sabji, but then the skin will be used as a chutney. And that's how, for the young people, I would say, find your grandmothers. Talk to them. Talk to them to learn about good eating. Document it. When Coca-Cola came back to India, we put the young children, my boy was also very little at that time, we said, go talk to elders. What did we drink before Coca-Cola? And they made a whole book, all the indigenous cold drinks. We call it Panna. Absolutely brilliant. But the reason we are talking about the future of food, and it's related to seed, is the new colonization. If the 80s the colonization was of seed, it is still of the seed, but now of food itself. So I'll just share with you 3 headers of books, articles. I think I have the news item here. Yeah. 13 nations agree to abolish farming in order to save the planet. It's an agreement. Linked to methane. But methane, in a natural cycle of cows grazing grass, is a biogenic cycle. Methane comes, it breaks down into carbon dioxide. Within 10 years, the carbon dioxide is taken up by the plants, and the grass grows. And the grass is eaten by the animals, and it's a perennial cycle. That's how we've had animals in the forest. There's no ecosystem which doesn't have animals. That's how we used to have so many more livestock on our farms. You talk to peasants, they will talk about, I had 50 cows. I had 100 cows. Now they can barely keep one. Another slogan, farming without farmers, food without farms. Farming without farmers is, of course, all the drones and the digital agriculture they talk about. But food without farms is lab food. And Bayer, which is now Monsanto, has said all this is wonderful for us because we'll be the only ones to grow in the large quantities the feed that is needed for lab food, the monocultures. And they're talking that food will not be food anymore. You can't go to your field and pick rice and cook it. You can't go to your field and pick your ragi and cook it. No. It'll all be raw materials of amino acids and protein as feedstock for lab food. Now, all this is being said in the name of saving the planet. I have a dear friend who's kind of gone into this track, and he says, lab food will destroy the farmers and save the planet. I had to respond a lot to him. He's a journalist of The Guardian. No, lab food will not save the planet. For one, it requires 5 times more feedstock than a cow in a factory farm. Of course, the free-range cow doesn't need anything. But even an intensive fed cow, 5 times more feed, 25 times more emissions, because this is a high-energy system. Every time you go further the industrialization path, 2 things happen. Number 1, you use more resources. Energy-intensive processes and resource-intensive processes. For the same thing, 10 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food in an industrial system. In an ecological system, 1 unit of energy to produce 10 units of food. Because these are generative systems, they actually generate. And the lessons I have learned from the seed over all these years, of course, lessons of freedom, the seed multiplies, lessons of generosity. No seed says, I will not give you food. They give food in abundance. Seeds cooperate. They cooperate with the bees for pollination. They cooperate with the soil organism. And no matter what you look at, every value we need as human beings comes from the seeds and the plants, including the real solution to climate change. Because if the Earth could bring her temperature down from 290 to 13, we're panicking about 1 degree. If 10% of the farms became organic, the 30 gigatons that they're looking for can be absolutely achieved while regenerating the soil, while regenerating biodiversity, while growing food. But of course, you begin with the seed. So we are at a moment of huge civilizational contest. And the civilization contest is now how to stay food sovereign and seed sovereign at a time where every seed and every bit of food is part of the new colonization. And I hope you, as future generation, will defend your freedom and the freedom of this country. Thank you.